My name is Vivian Cross, and I've learned that time doesn't heal everything. It just gives you the composure to face it without flinching. The dining room was buzzing with laughter when I walked in a late arrival to my sister's anniversary dinner. Every seat was filled except one directly opposite hers. She leaned back in her chair, wine glass tilted in her hand, eyes glinting with the same smugness I remembered from the day she took my fiancé. "You made it," she said, her smile razor sharp. "Alone, I see." I didn't answer. My coat slid from my shoulders into the waiting hands of the maitre d', and I took my seat with measured calm. Around us, forks clinked, and someone made a joke about déjà vu. The truth was, I'd prepared for this night for months, not to humiliate her, not even to prove I'd moved on, but to close a chapter that had festered in silence for years. Then the door behind me opened. A ripple went through the room. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossed the polished floor. My sister's eyes darted past me. Her smirk faltered, and before I even turned, I knew she'd recognize the man who'd just walked in. My husband. The room seemed to shrink the moment Nathan's shadow stretched across the table. He was a tall man, the kind whose presence commanded attention, without trying his suit, tailored in a way that whispered authority more than it shouted it. The overhead light caught the edge of his cufflinks, silver, understated, the kind that didn't need to announce their worth. I didn't have to turn to feel the shift. Conversations faltered, the soft clink of cutlery paused mid-air. My sister Lila set her wine glass down the base, clicking against the table, a fraction too hard. Her husband Dean looked between us, with the faint, puzzled frown of someone who'd just realized they'd walked into the middle of a story without knowing the first chapter. Nathan's hand came to rest on my shoulder, a light but steady touch. He leaned down, his voice, a low murmur, pitched just enough for Lila to catch. "Traffic was worse than I thought," he said. I tilted my head up to him, unhurried. "You made it," I replied, letting a small, measured smile touch my lips. Lila's expression tightened, barely a second's worth of tension, but enough. She'd always been composed, a master of social facades. Years ago, she'd been the one with a man beside her, basking in the validation of being chosen, her confidence swelling with every approving glance. Tonight, that balance had shifted, and she didn't yet know how to carry it. Nathan slid into the empty seat beside me. The conversation, which had evaporated upon his arrival, restarted in awkward fragments, the weather, someone's new car, a recent trip to Napa. Yet every word was threaded with an unspoken curiosity about the man at my side. I let them wonder. It was strange sitting here in the same restaurant, where Lila had once toasted her engagement to the man who was supposed to be mine. I remembered that night too well, the golden glow of the candles, the taste of champagne that soured in my mouth, the moment I noticed her hand slip under the table to clasp his. People laughed, clapped, raised their glasses, oblivious to the fact that my world had just been dismantled. Tonight, the air felt different. No betrayal here, only control. Mine. Nathan's hand brushed over mine on the table, his touch grounding. The gold band on my finger caught the light, subtle but unmistakable. Lila's gaze dropped to it, then flicked back up to my face. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak, then closed again. Dean, still unaware of the undercurrent, leaned forward. "So Nathan, what do you do?" Nathan's answer was simple. "Consulting. Nothing more. No titles, no explanations, just enough to keep the mystery intact." I knew his work couldn't be easily explained over dinner, without drawing too much attention, and for now, I preferred Lila stay in the dark. The waiter appeared with menus, offering a welcome pause. I ordered with quiet precision, Nathan following without hesitation. Lila hesitated, her eyes scanning the page, though I knew she'd memorized it years ago. It was a small thing, but telling her first real sign of uncertainty. When the waiter left, Nathan leaned toward me. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. "Perfectly." My gaze stayed fixed on Lila as I said it. She gave a quick, brittle laugh, loud enough for the table to hear. "Well, this is unexpected," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "How so?" I asked, my tone almost curious. Her eyes darted between us. "I just didn't think we'd all be here like this." Oh, I said lightly, lifting my water glass. Life's full of surprises. The words hung in the air for a moment. I watched her fingers tighten slightly around the stem of her glass. Years ago, I'd been the one holding my breath in her presence, searching for some anchor in a room where everyone else was on her side. Tonight, she was the one searching for footing. A server passed behind me, refilling glasses, and the sound of liquid pouring seemed louder than it should have been. I took a sip, steadying my own heartbeat, not because I was nervous, but because I didn't want to rush this. There was power in patience. Nathan began chatting with Dean about something trivial, the wine list, I think, but I barely heard them. My attention was on Lila, cataloging every flicker of discomfort. She glanced at her husband, then at Nathan, and I could almost see the calculations running behind her eyes. She wanted to ask who he was, what he did, how we'd met, but to do that in front of everyone would expose her curiosity, and Lila never liked to give anyone the satisfaction of knowing she didn't have all the answers. I leaned back slightly, letting my shoulders relax, my smile small but deliberate. This wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about reclaiming the part of myself she had stolen without apology, and judging by the faint tremor in her hand as she reached for her wine, I was already halfway there. The taste of the bread on the table was faintly bitter, though I knew it wasn't the food. Nathan was speaking with Dean about a vineyard outside Sonoma, but my mind kept tracing the cracks in the past, the ones that had started the night Lila crossed a line she could never uncross. I hadn't thought about that evening in detail for years. I'd trained myself to smooth over the memory, to pack it away in the mental storage closet where I kept things too sharp to touch. But seeing her now across the table dredged it up in vivid color. 3 years ago, I had been the one wearing the ring. A different ring, smaller, more delicate, but still a promise. The man was James, a quiet, reliable presence, who I thought would anchor my life. Lila had seemed thrilled for me, her laugh easy and bright, the way it always was, when she was at the center of someone's attention. I should have seen the signs. The way her gaze lingered on him too long, the way she leaned in when she spoke to him, her hand brushing his arm as if by accident. Back then, I told myself it was nothing. Sisters are allowed to be close. That's what I thought until the night she announced their engagement, months later, with no warning, no apology. She'd sent me a single text that morning, dinner tonight. Don't be late. The restaurant had been crowded, the air warm with candlelight and the murmur of conversation. I'd walked in expecting a family meal, maybe a belated birthday celebration. Instead, I saw them at the head of the table, her hand resting on his like it belonged there. The smile she gave me was sharp, almost daring me to react. I didn't. Not then. I'd sat through the toasts clapped when everyone else did and felt each cheer land like a bruise. After that, I disappeared for a while. Moved cities, changed jobs, built a life that didn't intersect with hers. She reached out occasionally, birthdays, holidays, but it was always perfunctory, as if to remind herself she was still in control of the narrative. She didn't know about Nathan. We met in the kind of place Lila would have dismissed as unremarkable, a small coffee shop tucked away on a quiet street, the kind where people went to work or read not to be seen. He'd been sitting by the window laptop, open his gaze, shifting occasionally to the world outside. I noticed him because he wasn't performing for anyone. Our first conversation had been about coffee of all things. He'd asked if the roast was any good. I told him it depended on whether he liked his mornings to taste like smoke or earth. He'd smiled slow and amused, and I'd felt something shift. Nathan didn't need to talk about himself, which made me want to know more. It took weeks before I learned he was a consultant, the kind who flew across time zones to solve problems no one else could fix. There was a steadiness to him, a kind of quiet authority that drew people in. By the time he asked me to dinner, I realized I'd stopped thinking about the past in terms of loss. It was just a closed chapter. Or so I thought. Tonight, watching Lila across the table, I could see the moment recognition hit her, not of Nathan himself, but of the fact that he didn't fit into any of her categories. He wasn't from our social circle, yet he carried himself like someone who could own it. That unsettled her. The food arrived salmon for me, lamb for Nathan, something elaborate and plated like artwork for Lila. I picked up my fork, but my appetite was secondary to the satisfaction of watching her try to place him. "So how did you two meet?" she asked finally, her tone light but edged. Nathan glanced at me, letting me decide how much to reveal. "In the city," I said simply. "It wasn't planned." "That's vague," she replied, taking a bite without looking at me. I smiled. "Some things don't need embellishment." Her eyes flicked to Nathan again. "And what kind of consulting is it that keeps you out late, different kinds?" Nathan said, his voice even. "Each situation's unique." It wasn't an answer, not really, but it left her with nothing to work with. She hated that. Dean jumped in with a story about a trip they'd taken to Hawaii, and for a while the tension receded into the background noise of clinking silverware and murmured conversations. But I caught her watching us when she thought I wasn't looking, her gaze darting between my hand, resting lightly on Nathan's, and his calm focus on me whenever I spoke. Once, years ago, I would have given anything for her approval, for her to see me as someone worth envying. Now I realized I didn't need it. The fact that she was unsettled was enough. I took another bite of salmon, savoring it, not the taste, but the quiet victory it symbolized. This wasn't about flaunting Nathan or the life I'd built without her. It was about balance being restored. And by the way she kept glancing at me, I knew she felt it too. Lila's laugh rang out across the table, a little too loud for the mild joke Dean had made. It was the kind of laugh she used when she wanted to remind everyone she was the center of gravity. But her eyes kept drifting back to Nathan Sharp and calculating as if she could will an answer from him without asking the right question. I poured myself a glass of water, letting the coolness settle the faint heat in my chest. I didn't come here for a fight, but I wasn't going to give her the comfort of pretending nothing had happened between us. "Viv, you've been quiet," my mother said from the far end, her tone warm, but with that undercurrent of curiosity she'd never been able to hide. "You usually have so much to share." "I'm listening," I replied, giving her a smile. "It's interesting watching the dynamic here." Dean chuckled, but Lila's fork stilled for a fraction of a second before moving again. The server came to clear plates, and Nathan leaned toward me slightly, his shoulder brushing mine, a small natural touch that drew Lila's gaze like a magnet. So she began tilting her head in that practiced way. "Nathan, where did you say you were from?" "I didn't," he said, polite but firm. "But I grew up on the coast." Her brows lifted just enough to suggest she wasn't satisfied. "Coastal boy. Must be nice. Did you two travel much before you met?" Nathan's eyes met hers directly, his expression unreadable. "We've traveled plenty since. Together." That answer sat between them like a stone dropped into water rippling outward. Lila's lips curved, but it was more reflex than warmth. The dessert menus arrived, giving her a moment to retreat behind the polite shuffle of ordering. I declined. Nathan followed suit. Lila chose something intricate, chocolate, layered over custard, the kind of thing she would never actually finish, but ordered for the presentation. When the plates were set down, she leaned back in her chair. "You know Viv," she said lightly. "I'm glad you..." bounced back. "After James, I wasn't sure you would." The table stilled just enough for me to notice. My father cleared his throat. Dean looked away. Nathan's hand resting on the table tightened slightly. "I did more than bounce back," I said evenly. "I built something worth keeping." Her smile froze for half a second before she took another dainty bite of dessert. "Of course you did." The conversation splintered after that small talk, the weather a new restaurant someone had tried, but under it all, I could feel her discomfort. She was used to holding the upper hand, to deciding when and how to acknowledge past betrayals. Tonight, that script wasn't hers to control. As the plates were cleared again, I caught Nathan watching her with quiet curiosity, like someone assessing the edges of a puzzle piece to see where it fit. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone shifted the air. And Lila. She kept smiling, but the cracks were there now, hairline fractures that would only widen before the night was over. The room had settled into a strange quiet, the kind that follows forced laughter and too many glances toward the clock. Lila was still leaning into her role, chatty poised the perfect hostess. But her eyes kept darting toward the entrance, as if she was waiting for something. Or someone. I let her stew in that quiet panic for a few beats longer, before reaching into my clutch. The metallic click of the clasp opening drew her gaze. From it, I pulled a simple velvet box no bigger than my palm. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The sight alone was enough to drain the remaining color from her face. Her husband noticed immediately. "What's that?" He asked, his voice light, but his brow furrowed. "An old piece," I said smoothly. "From years ago. It never fit me back then. But it fits perfectly now." The man's curiosity overcame his manners. "May I?" I slid the box across the table. His fingers opened it with a casual flick and froze. Inside lay the engagement ring that had once been his wife's trophy, the very symbol of her victory over me. Except now, it gleamed on a bed of white satin, perfectly polished, a silent testament to the fact that some things like truth could be reclaimed. His eyes darted to her. "You told me you pawned this years ago." Lila's lips parted, but no words came. A flush climbed her neck. I leaned back, my smile faint but steady. No, she didn't pawn it. She lost it. The weight of the room shifted. Conversations at the other end of the table slowed, then stopped entirely. People were listening now, whether they meant to or not. Lila's voice finally broke the silence. "Vivienne, this isn't the place." "Exactly," I cut in my tone, cool. "This isn't the place for lies." Her husband set the ring down with deliberate care, as though it might burn him. He didn't look at her again. Across the table, my husband reached over and rested his hand lightly on mine, not to restrain, but to anchor. His presence was a steady current under my composure, the unspoken reminder that I wasn't here to humiliate for sport. I was here to end a story she'd kept alive for too long. Lila swallowed the sound loud in the stillness. "You always were dramatic," she tried, her voice brittle. I didn't rise to it. I didn't need to. The silence was heavier than any retort I could have crafted. After a long pause, I stood. Every chair seemed to shift with me, the scrape of wood on polished floors echoing louder than it should have. I placed the ring back in the box, snapped it shut, and slipped it into my clutch once more. "Dinner was lovely," I said to no one in particular. "But I think we're done here." And just like that, the room exhaled, except for Lila. She sat, rigid eyes fixed on her untouched plate, her carefully curated evening in ruins. The night air outside was crisp, sharp enough to cut through the remnants of tension clinging to me. My husband's hand slipped into mine as we walked toward the car, his thumb brushing over my knuckles, a small grounding gesture that said more than any words. Through the tall dining room windows, I could still see the table. Lila hadn't moved. Her husband was speaking to someone at the far end, deliberately avoiding her gaze. Whatever facade she'd built had cracked in front of the very audience she craved. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. This wasn't about winning. It was about closing the book she'd kept open all these years, a book filled with half-truths and stolen moments she wore like a crown. My heels clicked softly against the pavement as we reached the car. My husband opened the door for me, and before sliding in, I glanced back one last time. For years I'd thought confronting her would be loud, messy, and fueled by anger, but standing there in the quiet aftermath, I realized something. True closure isn't a victory march. It's the calm that comes when you no longer need anyone to believe your side of the story. I had nothing left to prove, not to her, not to the family that once turned their faces away. The people who mattered already knew the truth. As the car pulled away, I let out a slow breath. Lila could keep whatever stories she wanted. I had my own life now, built on trust, on love, and on the kind of dignity no one could ever steal again. And that was worth far more than any ring.